bit from a story called Save Guy Hotel. Earlier we were talking about moments in history. This, just to give you some context, I'll need to give you context to understand the story. This is based on a night in San Francisco, 1977, at the International Hotel, which was where a lot of old Filipino men had lived for decades, because when they came to the States in the 20s and 30s, the anti-miscegenation laws prevented them from marrying women who were not, preventing any kind of mixed relationship. And the laws were such that they weren't allowed to bring their wives with them or girlfriends. So they came here looking for work, trying to make a life. They ended up becoming lifelong bachelors. And a lot of them lived in the International Hotel, it's called the APIA Hotel. In 1977, they were evicted because someone had bought the hotel and wanted to build like a mall or something. So it became the scene of a very famous protest. Thousands surrounded the building. And so the story Save the APIA Hotel is about two old Filipino men who live in the APIA Hotel. And it goes back and forth between that night, just sort of the 40-year span of their friendship. So the scenes that I'm going to read take place in the past when they first arrived in San Francisco. And our main character, his name is Fortunato. He's just arrived in San Francisco after working the asparagus fields in Stockton, because that's the only good work he can get. So he comes to San Francisco for a trip, and he meets Vicente, who convinces him to stay in San Francisco, because it seems like a place of possibility. So again, this takes place in the past, like in 1930. They walked up and down the streets, and Vicente named them: Kearny, Washington, Jackson, Clay. Certain blocks felt more familiar than the rest, those lined with small eateries and shops named Baton Kitchen, the Manila Rose Cantina, the Lucky Mabuhay Pool Hall. All around, Filipino men smoked, laughed, drank from silver flasks, hollering for each other and darting across the street as if this city had been theirs from the beginning. And sitting on the top step of an apartment building was the oldest Filipino Fortunato had ever seen in America, gazing at the moon as if it held the face of the one he loved. This is Manila town, Vicente said. Our small place in San Francisco. It's just like home, huh? Fortunato shook his head. This was better. They continued walking, and Vicente told his story. He came here alone from Manila at the start of 1933, scrubbed toilets and floors for a miserable half-year before finding better work as a bellhop in the Parkdale Hotel, a decent job with fairly decent pay, but the best you could do in times like these. It's hard out here sometimes, he said, slowing his pace. You get lonely, you get scared. His voice trailed off as though these were his final words for the night, the truth he finally had to admit. But then he stopped and turned to Fortunato. So you be tough, okay? He smiled and then punched him on the arm. Hours passed, bars and restaurants closed. They found themselves at the end of the city and walked along the Embarcadero. Look there, Vicente said, pointing toward the water. And through the dark, Fortunato saw it, the beginnings of the Bay Bridge. It would be the longest steel structure in the world, 8 miles connecting San Francisco to Oakland. For now, it was only a line of towers rising from the black water, half hidden in fog, and Fortunato wondered when it would be finished, if someday he might travel across it. I don't want to go back to Stockton, he said. Then don't, Vicente said. What's there anyway? Nothing, Fortunato thought. Just a hard, thin mattress, a canvas bag filled with a few clothes he owned, and more days in the asparagus fields with the kind of men he dreaded becoming. They made their way to Kearny Street and entered the APIA Hotel, where Vicente kept a room for $6 a week. He offered his floor for the night, and Fortunato accepted, rolled up his coat for a pillow, and used Vicente's as a blanket. It was his best sleep in America yet. The next day, Vicente loaned Fortunato $12 for 2 weeks' rent, and he checked into number 14 on the 3rd floor, the room next door to Vicente's, and exactly the same. A small narrow space with a twin bed, a corner sink, and a single window that looked out on the 800 block of Kearny Street. Below, Fortunato could see 2 Filipino groceries, a barber shop, a Chinese laundry, and on the rooftop across, an unfinished billboard with a half-painted picture of a crate of apples, the word new written in yellow letters beneath. It's not much of a view, Vicente said. Fortunato opened the window, letting in a breeze. But it's good enough for now, he said. Fortunato had left Stockton with no money and no plan, but in the beginning, San Francisco worked the way America should. He had a friend, a room of his own, and soon a bellhop position at the Parkdale Hotel. Vicente lied to get Fortunato the job. He
told his boss that a cousin with 3 years' experience as the houseboy of Seattle's ex-mayor had just arrived in the city looking for work. I told them I've known you my whole life, he explained, so you try to act like it. The following morning, they caught the first cable car on the California line, rode to the top of Nob Hill, and stepped off of Powell and Mason. Straight ahead was the Parkdale Hotel, 7 stories high, 20 windows across, and from where Fortunato stood, it seemed the rest of the city had vanished behind it. Inside, a dozen marble pillars held up the lobby's mahogany ceiling, a brass staircase spiraled upward, and in the copper elevator doors, Fortunato could see his reflection. His bellhop uniform fit tightly and made him stand up straight. His pomade slicked hair gleamed under the light, and a dozen buttons on his coat could be mistaken for gold. Those months in the field stooped over in the dusty heat, the brim of his hat casting an unending shadow on his face. That was someone else's anonymous life. Now, when Fortunato crossed the lobby, he would welcome guests in his best English, and they, in turn, regarded him with courteous smiles. But the best times in the day, those moments when he believed he was where he truly belonged, were when he passed Vicente in the hallway or on the stairs. Vicente would nod with a quick smile of recognition, and sometimes, when no one was watching, he would reach out and punch him on the arm. At the end of Fortunato's first month in the city, Vicente raised a bottle of Chinese vodka to the night sky and said, "To Fortunato, the finest houseboy in all of Seattle." He took a swig and passed it over. Fortunato drank, swallowed slowly to ease the burn. They were on the 3rd floor fire escape of the APIA Hotel, too tired to change out of their uniforms. They sat for hours, laughing as they reminisced about the night they met, as though it had happened years instead of only weeks before. But as the night grew darker and colder, their faces turned serious, their voices quiet. "It's good that I found you," Vicente said. "Finally, someone I can talk to who doesn't whine about life." "You can't listen to them," Fortunato said. "They just get you down." "But it's tough," Vicente said. "I have no family, no wife, no home of my own." "Those things will happen," Fortunato said, "I promise. But it's better here, yeah? We were right to come." Fortunato leaned in, so close he saw Vicente's eyes glisten, and said yes. They let moments pass in silence, and a solitary car drove down Kearny. "I'm drunk," Vicente said, setting the bottle by Fortunato's feet. "What's left is yours." He rested his head against the brick wall, blinked slowly until his eyes stayed shut. He was shivering, so Fortunato took off his jacket and draped it over Vicente's shoulders, tucked it under his chin. His hands were just below his jaw, and a finger at the edge of his lip. Fortunato had been this close with others before, those few flirtatious men back home who at some point became willing. But it was never like this. Below, the street was empty and silent, every window and doorway was black, and the sliver of moon cast no light. These were signs that the world was offering up this moment, a chance to understand what it was like to kiss the one you knew, perhaps loved. "Good night," he told himself, "that's all it means," and moved closer until their faces touched. He kissed Vicente, and just as he was about to apologize, he felt Vicente kissing him too. Then Vicente turned away. "It's late," he said. "Time to go back." He got to his feet and climbed through the window, and Fortunato watched him walk down the far end of the hallway, where he unlocked his door and shut it behind him. It was almost daylight when Fortunato finally returned to his room. He sat on his bed with his back to the wall, listened to Vicente on the other side, breathing and turning in his sleep. Later, just before work, Vicente opened Fortunato's door, already dressed in his uniform. "Come on, slowpoke," he said, snapping his fingers. He made no mention of the night before, only that his head still buzzed from the vodka they shared. Then he hurried down the stairs, and Fortunato slowly got up, and when he saw his face in the mirror above the sink, he understood how this would go, as it did back home, with silence and forgetting, the only way he knew. All that became of their kiss was longing. Fortunato began counting off days and weeks since it happened, believing that enough passing time would blur the night into one that perhaps never happened at all. But it only brightened in his mind, and when months dragged into a year and then another, it was an absolute truth. Once, long ago, they had kissed. On nights when Vicente caroused in bars with easy women, or purchased hours in a Chinatown brothel, Fortunato would lie awake in bed, so restless that he kicked away his sheets, dressed, and walked down the empty blocks of Manila town to the Embarcadero, where he would stand by the rail and look out at the Bay Bridge, which was nearly finished. Its progress was evidence that the world still turned forward, leaving behind a night when he was truly happy, and the moment